All right, welcome back to a bonus episode that we wanted to do in 2024, but we didn't want to go see Nosferatu on Christmas Day when it was released here. I think UK and Britain, it was released on January 1st.
Oh, yeah?
So I think that was a better fit for me.
So you didn't see this on Christmas Day?
I did not, no. Yeah, I did not. We are going to be doing Nosferatu, Robert Eggers' reinterpretation of a famous film that we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Come to me. Come to me. Standing before me was death.
So this is 7.7, very solid score on IMDb, 85 critics, 74 audience, 2 hours and 12-minute runtime. Directed by Robert Eggers. The cast, Lily Rose Depp as Ellen, Nicholas Hoult as Thomas, Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok, Aaron Taylor-Johnson as Friedrich, and Willem Dafoe with a killer mustache as Professor Von Franz. Ralph Ineson is in this as well as a supporting character. So, summary of this film, if you're not familiar with Nosferatu, this is a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake.
Do you remember what season? So we did review the original Nosferatu. Oh, yeah. I think it was season 5.
Maybe.
Because season
I don't
6,
remember.
Yeah, I think it was season 5. So you can go back and check out. I think it's going to be 4 or 5. I think it's 5. But we did do a review of the original.
Yeah, so this is a remake or a reinterpretation of F.W. Murnau's 1922 silent masterpiece.
It's a nice
of German Expressionism. It's Eggers' 4th feature after The Witch, Lighthouse, and The Northman. And just a general critic response. There's a quote here. Marvelously orchestrated by Eggers, Nosferatu is a behemoth of a horror film that is equal parts repulsive and seductive.
Yeah.
So there you go. What were your thoughts going into this?
Right. Well, so I've been burned so many times this year by watching trailers that I tried to go in as blind as possible. So I was in theaters when the trailer was playing, but I kind of averted my eyes. So I didn't properly watch the trailer. Yeah. I had enough faith in Eggers that it was going to be good on some level. The interesting thing with Eggers is that there's varying levels of accessibility with his films, I think. So something like The Northman is pretty accessible, and I think your average film goer can go and watch it and enjoy it on an entertainment level. But then there's something like The Lighthouse, which if you're a cinephile, there's a lot to love there. But for your average moviegoer, probably maybe not going to. I think that one's more hot and cold. Yeah. Like I heard people who saw The Witch and thought, oh, The Witch is really good. Oh, Lighthouse. And then went like, oh, I hated that movie. So I know the reception for that one is mixed. So I kind of went in with tempered expectations in terms of knowing this could be a slower burn. Yeah. Or it could be more accessible, and we can talk about where it falls. But so I went in with high but somewhat realistic and tempered expectations, I would say.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
How about you?
I definitely, I was just trying to think if I had seen any previews in the theaters. If I had, they were very circumspect about Orlok. So you did, like, none of that you saw. I was cautiously optimistic because I thought there was a lot to like from the 1922 original.
Mm-hmm. But it's 1922.
Yeah.
If ever there was a film deserving of a remake, I would say,
sure,
100 years later is a valid amount of time to pass to warrant a remake.
Excuse me. I mean, there was a remake of sorts,
sure,
right, with Werner Herzog in 1979. I mean, some people say that those are the 3 kind of Orlok vampire movies, as opposed to I mean,
The Bram Stokers.
Yeah. But what I like about this film, and I'm sure we'll get into more details, and what I liked about The Witch too is I have such a high respect for Eggers' deep dive into the history of the lore and the time period, and how he, I feel, successfully balances, and this came out in the critics' comment, that seductive nature, the repressed sexuality of the Victorian time, with the repulsiveness of Orlok's character and some of the other things that had the rats and all that kind of stuff. But I do feel like it was a worthy remake, and he did enough of his own material that I feel like
he almost goes in as a historical filmmaker first.
Yeah.
Like all of his films, and Josh, who we brought on for Midsommar, like he is like a Norse specialist, and he was blown away with how like the deep cuts and stuff that Eggers threw into the Northman. And I was watching some stuff on this as well in terms of like the Romanian history. Yeah. Like some of the gods and stuff that he's mentioning in this film are like long forgotten. Like no one even knows who these people are. So he clearly goes in doing his research. And I think, I forgot her name, but she was dumping on like the nun, which Romanians like not even Catholic, and they had, come on guys, they could have done some basic research. So if nothing else, you know that Eggers is going to bring it when it comes to like historical representation. Yeah. Whether it was from The Lighthouse or The Northman or The Witch or here, that Victorian time period.
So what are your thoughts about the performances?
Performances? Really strong. Like I was impressed. Okay, the highlight for me was Willem Dafoe. I'm a huge Willem Dafoe fan, but I liked his character. Everyone was pretty like, kind of like down and foreboding and a bit melancholic. He kind of brought a little more like spirit. Yeah. Ralph Ineson, I always like his voice. It's just so good. Lily Rose Depp was really good. I think Nicholas Hoult is only doing vampire films from now on, like Dracula counterparts. Exactly. Of course, with Nicolas Cage and Renfield, that was pretty funny. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, hey, you're hanging out with Dracula again. My one issue was maybe Bill Skarsgård, not his performance, but something about the mustache. Like the look of Nosferatu compared to what I was expecting was just kind of off-putting. I found it didn't work for me. It's that subjective. There was nothing objectively wrong with it. But something about like Nosferatu, I think of him as like, very bald. Like his head is bald and his face is bald, and he's like all skin and almost like alien looking. So something about the mustache just kind of weirded me out. Did you like the mustache?
I did actually, because historically,
that's right,
a nobleman of that time period. Like he's obviously older than that time period, but I think he would have had a mustache.
He would have, and he looks like Vlad the Impaler.
Yes,
would have
exactly.
So from a historical standpoint, it's on point. Yeah. But from the aesthetic of the 1922 Nosferatu, I was expecting, I guess, a similar look. Okay. And fair enough to iterate on it. But just kind of weirded me out, Nosferatu having a mustache.
I think where it draws from that original 1922 is how he moves and his fingers.
Long fingers, yeah.
And some of the shadow work.
Totally.
It was very reminiscent of the 1922 film. I mean...
But performances were off the charts good. Like if there's all the Eggers filmed performances are top notch. Like there's no complaint about performances. They were all fantastic.
For me, the weak link was Aaron Taylor Johnson, though.
Oh, really?
I didn't, especially in the early part of the film, I did not find him very believable.
Oh, interesting.
As
okay.
That character.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
Lily Rose Depp
she was really good.
Outstanding. And I was.
Did you connect that to who it was?
No.
No, until the credits.
I mean, no, I knew it was her, but I'm not familiar with her or her work.
No, me neither.
So I didn't immediately go, oh, that's Lily Rose Depp. Apparently all the things that she does physically, that was all her.
Cool.
So yeah, that was kind of cool as well.
The range required for her role was more than anybody else, I think, in the film. So she pulled it off. She was really good.
I felt like, and maybe we can get into more detail later, but because of who her character was, and this was something I really liked about Eggers' version of the film because of who her character was. I think she and Orlok basically carry the film because the film is the connection between those two characters. And I mean,
Nicholas Hoult is really good as well.
He's
part of that.
Yes.
It's a bit of a love triangle almost.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a repulsive love triangle, right? And we can talk more about that. But what did you think about the look of the film? Because it's almost desaturated. It's almost black and white.
That's what was so cool. I mean, this is one of the most gorgeous films I think I've ever watched. Like the thing I found, every shot was like layered and deep. Like you would have in the background, you'd have like a lit sky with like snow coming down. And then you'd have like a hallway with a figure in it. And then in the foreground, you'd have another thing.
Yeah.
And all those kind of like the Gothic architecture. And yeah, that everything is like blue and gray, which as you're saying, it almost gives it that black and white aesthetic, but without being black and white.
Yeah.
But all the shots are gorgeous. Like the shots of the castles, and there's warmer inside shots sometimes where you have like warm fires and stuff. Yeah. But the movie is very cold the whole way through.
Yeah.
But really beautiful, like the way it's lit. And I found every shot was long and with multi layers and a lot of depth in all the shots. And so for me, the best part about the movie, I think, was the cinematography.
Yeah.
And like every shot was almost like a work of art. Like it.
Yeah.
Like I do feel like it's one of the more gorgeous movies I've seen just visually.
Yeah, I mean, I had that that it was beautifully lit, and then that the color palette of the film, or the lack of color in the color palette, almost makes it like a black and white, but it lends it's that cold atmosphere and that dreariness.
Like I wonder if he was tempted, almost like Schindler's List or something, to do it black and white to pay homage to the original. But I think this is a nice compromise between having color, but as you say, have it so muted that it's reminiscent of the black and white aesthetic.
One of the things I wanted to ask you off the top, and I didn't, but it's good as time as any. My apologies. I've still got some kind of cold or something. Anyway, did we need another vampire movie? As good as it is.
Yeah.
Did it need to be remade?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think of all the different, because we've talked a little, maybe not on the podcast so much, but you and I have talked about a bit for sure, the different styles of vampires. And you have like the suave kind of debonair lover vampire. And then you've got the disheveled kind of creepy looking Nosferatu one. And you've got the schlocky Nicolas Cage. I mean, like there's so many different representations. And I liked this one, the kind of like, and then there's kind of like the feral creature or the like the deadly killer. Like there's just so many different iterations.
Don't forget the sparkly ones.
And the sparkly ones. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Twilights. But this one was almost felt like some of those religious, more demonic possession types where he is like evil personified and like he is the Antichrist and he is just pure evil and almost acted as like a demonic possession force. Yeah. Like it kind of gave me like Exorcist vibes at a certain point because she is possessed almost by him.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that representation of the vampire is not something we've seen a whole lot of. So that unique take to it, in my mind, sort of justified its existence. Like, I appreciated having that because if there was just more like another Blade film or like the kind of action vampire or the like sexy romantic vampire, I'm kind of burnt out on those, but I appreciated that his take on the vampire was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of what you said. And I do like somebody like Christopher Lee or Frank Langella who do the suave, there's a sexual energy to those vampires, because I think what that captures is the repressed sexuality of the Stoker novel, right?
Totally.
It's a Victorian novel, and he's writing about, all of these, neck bites and whatever, because he can't talk about sexuality overtly. Yeah. So everything's coded. Whereas this one, I think what's really compelling about the 1922 and Eggers is there's a sexual energy and connection between Ellen and Orlok.
Mm-hmm.
But he's so disgusting and repulsive. And so there's this yin and yang, pull.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And even, I mean, it's the same in the original. And I remember being a little bit taken aback by this because in the original, it's similar in the sense of Orlok comes to visit and she accepts him almost as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And this one is similar, but of course, 100 years plus later, you can more explicitly do the sexuality part.
Yeah.
Which I think is so critical to any kind of vampire film. And that's what made, I think, Christopher Lee such a good vampire in the Hammer films, was that he's tall and he was 6'5". He's imposing as a person, as a character, but there's also this lustful energy, right, with him. And I think even though Orlok is absolutely hideous, just the thought of Orlok and Ellen just gives you the shivers, right? It's like, oh, he's touching her, or he's...
Yeah, because we don't want to spoil it, but there's an implication that her first contact with him is, I don't know, is this spoilers? I don't know.
Yeah, let's save it for
I wonder
the
if we should
spoiler.
dive into this a little bit deeper later.
Yeah.
Although one interesting thing I read, and makes perfect sense now, because we're like, why would you release this on Christmas? Like, who wants to go see a horror film on Christmas Day? But the idea that he is like the Antichrist. And so they had it come out on Christmas Day because with the birth of Jesus also shows up with the birth of the Antichrist at the same time.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay, that's super cool. So if there's like a thematic, like apparently Eggers wanted it to come out on Christmas Day for that reason.
Okay. I wondered about that. Yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I can buy the Christmas Day release because it did seem very odd to me. Like, what are you doing? Like, do you want to make money? Like, why would you release this on Christmas Day? But then the fact that it ties into the representation of Dracula in this case, I thought was cool. Another, okay. I think we'll talk more about the analysis stuff, maybe in the spoilers, because it might be hard to talk about some of these things without giving away spoilers. One question I have for you, though, out of curiosity. So now that we have seen this, would this make your top 10? And do you know any thoughts on how high on this on your list it would be?
I think 100% it would have made my top 10. Just because it's such a gorgeous film, the performances are great. I'm drawn to the story. I mean, I've watched the original silent film a few times, and I really like what they do with the Orlok character and his, rat-like, the way he moves and everything. Where would it have been?
Like for me, I think I like number 4.
Yeah, I was going to say middle of the pack.
Because I think 5. I enjoyed like Strange Darling, The Substance, and Heretic more. But it was probably the best film, objectively speaking, in terms of like cinema craft. Like I think it was probably the best one. But in terms of my personal like enjoyment with it, probably about number 4.
Yeah, I would have been similar because there were just so many good films in 2024. It would have been middle of the pack, like 4 or 5 for me as well.
So when we left the theater, one of your first comments was that was really long. So what was your enjoyment level? And we went to see it with Francois, who came on to talk about the menu, and he was like, "Oh yeah, like it was gorgeous, but it was a bit slow." Like I think his reaction was maybe more on the negative side. He's not here. I haven't asked him, but. And the fact that your first reaction was that was long, where did that sit with you?
Well, I mean, if you've watched any of our episodes, I'm notorious for, disliking movies.
But you love the wailing.
I did. But it had so much diversity in the story,
right,
that it kept changing up, right? Yeah. So despite the fact that it was beautiful, and the performances were really strong and all the rest of it, and the fact that I love the lore, I did feel there were, I think a 90 or hour and 45 runtime would have been, I don't know if you needed 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Yeah.
That's my feeling. But I think
critics felt that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but I will own the fact that I'm biased that way. Like I like and I think it's because of my age. I mean, I grew up with the 90-minute film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are exceptions to that, of course, but and good exceptions, like The Omen is certainly not 90 minutes long. I don't even think The Exorcist, I don't know what the runtime, but it's not 90 minutes. So, having said all that, I just felt that there were, even though it is a movie, it's not a jump scare film, it's not an action horror film, it's a dread film. I felt like it could have been a little bit shorter.
Yeah, I think in terms of accessibility, I'd probably put this above The Lighthouse, but below The Witch and The Northman. So I think for your average film goer to just go and appreciate, I think it would be more accessible than The Lighthouse. But I think The Witch and The Northman probably easier to
The Witch for
digest.
sure. Yeah. Although, interestingly, I mean, The Witch is similar in the sense of, I guess there's maybe more action, and because it's set in a different time period, there's almost like a survival.
It's not as long too, is it?
I don't think so. I mean, I was trying to think what was the runtime of that, but I don't have a sense that it was this long.
Yeah.
But I think because of the style of film that this is, and that he's trying to, milk that dread, maybe he felt compelled to have it be the runtime that it was. But
yeah, I was really into it for like the first half. And then I guess we can't give plot spoilers. About halfway through, during the kind of like when the act transitions to the second half, then I kind of started to bog down a little bit.
Is that when the ship arrives?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense to me. I think they spent a lot of time on that aspect of it. Maybe more so like, so if you go back and look at the 22 film, the Murnau film, that's in there, but it's just in there, and then it's in the background.
And there's the primary characters and the primary plot.
Yeah.
But then it kind of delves into like the doctors and the other family and the kids and like what's happening with them, which kind of takes away from the main love triangle that we talked about. So I wonder if that maybe some of that could have been cut. It does add depth and richness though as well.
Yeah. I mean,
but you almost could have left the whole Willem Dafoe stuff out of it.
I don't think you could leave Willem Dafoe out of it.
No, I would want to. I thought he was great, but
I think he's necessary as a character because that's what gets you to the end of the film. There's nobody else who knows what he knows.
Yeah.
And therefore he's necessary for the film to progress. Right.
Yeah.
What I could have done without are the, slower scenes where they're walking on the beach or, this or that. It's like, okay, when we get maybe insight, if you want to call it that, into the other family.
Yeah.
I don't know that was necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have made it kind of more surface and still had the same result because those characters are not fully realized the same way as the others are anyway. So you could have diminished their presence in the film, and I don't think it would have hurt the film.
Yeah. I'll talk a bit more about that in the spoiler section.
Okay.
Is there anything else that we should talk about non-spoiler before we jump in?
The one thing I was trying to remember, and we've talked about this before too, this is the challenge of going to see a film in the theater.
Yes, we saw this in theater 2 days ago, 3 days ago.
Yeah, 3 days ago.
Yeah.
So the challenge is, I'm not adept at writing notes in the dark, and I'm not going to be that guy that opens my phone and takes notes or whatever. So there were things that I was trying to remember because you're focusing on so many different things. Did you have any thoughts about the score or the?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was trying to remember.
I know, and
I remember liking the score.
Yeah,
but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah,
I seem to recall it was sort of haunting and orchestral, but to be honest,
yeah, I would have liked to. And then of course I'll rewatch this one. It won't have the same impact. I think this is a film, and not many horror films are like this, but this is a film that it was worth seeing on the big screen.
100%.
Because of the beauty of the cinematography and how it was shot.
Yeah, if you're watching this or listening to this right now, like you should definitely go see it in theaters if you get a chance, because it is a visual masterpiece, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, aside from you with a 100-inch TV, it won't come off if you just have a 50-inch like I do.
No. So I was kind of thinking like, I feel like Eggers is almost a bit like the Stanley Kubrick of horror films. In that he's like a brilliant filmmaker, but his films are maybe not as accessible as like a Spielberg would be. So like if John Carpenter is the Spielberg of horror, I feel like Eggers is maybe a bit like the Kubrick, where like he's a master filmmaker. They're amazing films, but like your average filmgoer might not appreciate them, or they're like kind of inaccessible. You almost have to like work to get stuff out of them. Is that an appropriate comparison, do you think? Or
that sounds, I mean, I'm hoping he's not
like Eyes Wide Shut or even Space Odyssey. I don't know. Like, I think your average filmgoer might have a harder time with those movies. If you just want entertainment value.
I would consider myself maybe not the average filmgoer, and I struggled with both of those films that you mentioned.
So I would feel like I'm hesitant sometimes to recommend Eggers films to people. Even like people would say, "Oh, I've heard The Witch, The Witch, The Witch." Like, oh, that really wasn't what I was expecting at all. Like, I think Jordy and Kara, we had them on, talked about that. And that's one of the more accessible ones. So I could see if you're not a diehard horror fan who knows Nosferatu, who is into the lore, who doesn't really care much about cinematography. If you're just there for entertainment and you want like horror, I don't know.
I don't think this would do it for you.
I think a lot of people might be bored.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not appreciating the depth of understanding that Egger brings to a film, in terms of his research and his mastery of film craft, if you're not noticing how something's lit or how it's shot or the depth of field that you mentioned, if you're not noticing those things, then you probably are like, well, when's
if you're just waiting for the kills,
when's Orlok gonna rip a neck open or something? I think you would be disappointed and you would struggle to enjoy this film.
Yeah, where it's the same thing. If you're a cinephile, like watching Eyes Wide Shut is like an amazing experience.
Sure.
But if you're just there for entertainment value.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That kind of came to my mind when I was driving home thinking of.
Yeah, I think that's
just in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy because I do think he's, I mean, I struggled with accessibility in The Lighthouse.
Yeah.
The Northman was not as accessible as The Witch for me, but it was a pretty entertaining film on the whole.
There's quite a bit of action. There's plot twists. And there's. And
so you watch it and you go, okay. I mean, it's like
it's more conventional as a film in terms of the structure. And
there's more of that historical drama action film that you kind of can relate to.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a casual horror fan and whatever subgenre you like, whether it's, the Wolfman or whatever it is, slashers, if you're looking for the body count or you're looking for the scares, there's not really much of that there for you.
Yeah. Those atmospheric horrors are just a different.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this falls in terms of classification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because like when I finished Longlegs or I finished Heretic, I was like, oh, I can't wait to watch that again. Yes. Whereas this one, I was like, oh, that was really good. I really appreciate that. That was gorgeous cinematography. That was amazing performances. But I didn't feel that pulled and I can't wait to rewatch it. Like I was kind of like, okay, like I'm kind of good for now. It's kind of same with The Witch, same with The Lighthouse. Like I really appreciate them when I watch it, but I don't feel that need to like go back and rewatch them the same as I would something.
Yeah, interesting. Whereas for me, The Witch, I've seen 3 times.
I have 2.
But I haven't gone back and watched, although I want to go back and watch The Lighthouse to capture, to get things that I didn't get the first time. There's also the part of me is like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this again.
Yeah. But I appreciated it so much when I was watching it, but also the same thing. It's like,
I mean,
this is a bit long.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he obviously has enough of a draw or an appeal, that people are coming to see his movies. But again, if you look at the audience score of 74, and the critics of 85 and the 7.7 on IMDb, like with many of the films that we've reviewed, the critics are seeing the things that we're seeing, whereas the audience is like, hey, where's the, whatever.
Yeah, if you're just thinking, oh, cool vampire film, but this is not your typical vampire film.
I mean, this is what made, and I mean, it's a product of its time, but I mentioned Christopher Lee and the Hammer Dracula films. This is what made those films so accessible, was you got the blazing red eyes of Dracula, and you also got the the kind of nymphette vampires, and there was action and there was lore and there was a balance for everybody. This leans heavily into the lore and understanding a different element of the film that not everybody's going to appreciate. For sure.
So, do you recommend Nosferatu to our audience?
Okay, so yes, with a caveat.
Okay.
So my yes is it's an absolutely gorgeous and well-acted film. And I think if you appreciate film, you will not be disappointed with this. However, if you go into this thinking, oh, it's a horror film, you're going to be disappointed. Because there are horror elements, but it relies heavily on atmosphere and characterization and performance and the lore. And if you're not into that, you're going to walk away disappointed, I think.
Yep. I think I would second that. It's definitely one of the best horror movies of the year. It's gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful movies I've seen, but yeah, it's, if you're wanting action, it's a slower paced
burn,
film.
for sure. Yeah.
So if you're okay with a slower pace, I do recommend it.
There you go. So 2 cautious recommends.
2 cautious recommends.
And spoilers?
Yep.
Spoilers. Okay.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
What do you want to spoil?
Well, just the other interpretation I came across was Dracula as like the representation of depression. So there's a lot of stuff in the film about like melancholia, or the first Ralph Ineson's character thinks that she's like depressed, and like using the ether and the corset, and that she kind of implied like I've had this connection with Nosferatu for a long time, and then when she gets married and discovers happiness, that's when he returns to like drag her back, and that her final grapple with depression is perhaps suicide and death in terms of her final interaction with him. I thought that was a cool take and interpretation. I can kind of see that, because the sexual stuff is there, but it doesn't feel the same as some of the other.
No,
like there is definitely some sexual energy in this one, but I don't see him as, I don't think that's his primary representation. Like for me, him as the Antichrist makes a lot more sense. Him as, I do kind of see that him as depression or mental illness or something too maybe works. So I don't know what you think about that.
I can see that. My only challenge with that is, so do you interpret it as she's always had a connection with Orlok, or
not always? It's kind of implied at the beginning, right? She says that she almost had like a sexual encounter with him.
Yeah. But that was after she was, so how I interpreted it was when there's a scene where she says, come to me, or whatever the line is.
Yeah.
And he hears that, but that she wasn't calling out to him necessarily.
Oh, okay.
I didn't interpret it as specifically him.
Right.
But, and this is maybe a little clearer in the Coppola film. I've come across Oceans of Time, To Be With You or whatever, the Gary Oldman line. But in this one, I think she's reaching out to something, but it's not Orlok, but he's the one that answers the call.
So could that be a representation of depression then as well?
Sure.
It's like it found her. That's wasn't what she was looking for.
Fair, yeah.
Maybe she's looking for something and she found at
Yes.
some point in her life. I mean, I don't know if that's the interpretation. It just interested me. And I thought,
Yeah,
that's
it's
kind of
interesting.
compelling.
Yeah. And
That's a problem, right? With seeing this in theaters.
Yes.
Is we're going on memory. And I would have to go back and rewatch those scenes and hear the deliberate. But yeah, it's possible.
Well, and I saw an interpretation. I think it was the British critic, Mark Kermode, who was talking about people blaming Ellen for Orlok, whereas she's responsible for him being there, but she's not to blame for him being there. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Now we mentioned early on, you were talking about sort of the halfway point of the film, because this happens in the original too, where he's coming over on the ship. The ship lands and the rats come off the ship, and then it's a plague ship, right?
Yeah.
And that idea of sickness, and I think it ties in with that idea of depression. Right? For sure.
Yeah.
And there is that idea of seduction and sickness, kind of counterbalancing one another, that repulsion and seduction balancing one another. And of course, I think the idea is that Orlok, being who he is, brings death with him.
Yeah. And the whole cold aesthetic of the film.
Yes.
But she is warmly lit at times, especially right after getting married. But then it goes back to that cold.
Yeah.
It's an interesting take, and it would be something that's kind of unique. Like if you're going to, as you say, like here's another vampire film, but it almost requires another take on vampires, or another, like Dracula's represented so many different things throughout the ages that this could just be a new, unique opportunity to explore a different issue.
And I should have put this in the first half, but we talked about this when we reviewed the original. But for those of you who are wondering why it's Orlok, like if you don't know the story behind this, so Murnau didn't have the rights to Stoker's novel, and so he changed the names of the characters, and then was sued by Stoker's widow. And the original film was supposed to be destroyed, all the copies, and of course they weren't, and there were copies left. And we talked about this before too.
You put it on Pirate Bay way back, right?
Yeah, exactly.
22, yeah.
So there are several copies. Some have
when we reviewed it, you and I watched different copies. Yeah.
Because I watched the BFI, I think not remake, but what am I trying to say? Remaster of the film. So yeah, anyway, that's why he's Orlok, and that's why you don't have a Renfield and you don't have these characters that we recognize.
Mina Harker, Mina,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't, whatever the characters are called, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think I really enjoyed, one of the things that I think was I mean, maybe it's there in the original, but it's harder to get because it's a silent film. But I really appreciated when Thomas comes to Orlok's castle, and Orlok's sense of control right away, right? Like, you will address me as a nobleman. That's not, I mean, there might be suggestions. Like I think in the Gary Oldman performance, there might be a suggestion there, but it's not as overt as this one.
Yeah. And when he's like, okay, like we did the deal, I'm going to go home now. Yeah. It's like, no, you're staying here. Yeah. Like, yeah, that control, that makes sense.
So I appreciated that because, you know, it's kind of like that character, that noble who is not only used to having control, used to just people following his direction, right? Like he's not used to hearing no, or not used to anybody having their own opinion or their own ideas, right?
Yeah, I kind of like the duality of the city kind of representing like science and the Enlightenment, and then the castle representing the occult, and the guys out there, the like, are they gypsies? Gypsies?
Yeah, I think they're gypsies.
Romas, yeah, like murdering vampires and riding with topless women on horses. like that. And then you get the marriage of the two kind of at the end. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And even the two doctors, right? So the first doctor's trying to use like conventional science.
Yeah.
But we have to go to Willem Dafoe's more like occult approach. So they seem to be playing with some of those themes as well.
For sure.
And but I'm kind of compelled by the Antichrist or just the pure evil representation as well.
Doesn't Willem Dafoe's character refer to him? I found this interesting as the undead.
I think so.
Almost like a zombie.
Yeah.
Because although logically you know that a vampire's undead because they had to die and come back to life, but it's not that often that I hear them in movies referred to as the undead.
No.
In the same way that you do zombie films, right?
In that time period, you would have had someone like Vlad the Impaler, who was a real person who did horrible things, but he's not undead.
Yeah.
So yeah, you get the sense of those characters. Maybe think of him as like an evil person, but not, not pure evil or evil incarnate. Because a lot of things they do with her, it's evocative of those possession films.
Yes.
Almost like performing an exorcism at different times, and she's like writhing around the bed, and there are sexual undertones. Like the noises she makes implies there is like a sexual connection to Nosferatu. But yeah, there's just a lot going on. Like I think this is one, though I wasn't immediately compelled to run out and watch it again.
Yeah.
Looking for the more thematic things and what Eggers was trying to go for. It's hard to get that from your first viewing in a theater.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate too, having read the Stoker novel and understanding a little bit about, the repressed sexuality of Victorian England, just the idea, I think it's more overt in this film that Ellen's character is repressed and she's not believed, and she has a connection to something otherworldly. I mean, there's definitely
because she's like, don't go. Like I'm having these premonitions, and he's just like, sorry, I got to go. Like he doesn't really heed her warning with any.
And there's a sense that she's almost clairvoyant. Like in the past, she's had visions or she's known things or whatever. And not just the Victorian era, but much further. I mean, women were basically dismissed. Like you couldn't possibly know that, or you that can't possibly be real. You just need some ether and a tighter corset and be
tighten the corset should be fine. Yeah.
And be tied down to the bed, But I felt her performance was really compelling, and there were really, I see your line about, possession, because some of the movements that she does on the beds and stuff is exactly like The Exorcist.
I'm like, you were doing the demonic possession film better than a lot of those demonic possession films.
Yes.
Like all those kind of Exorcist knockoffs that aren't very good. I felt like, this is actually like, that's when I was really enjoying the film. Is he captured that really well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I think because Eggers steeps himself in the history of whatever story he's telling. Yeah. That comes out, that's obvious in the film. Whether you know it as a viewer, it kind of seeps into the film because of his understanding of what he's doing.
And the other thing that stood out too, like we often associate the vampire bite with almost like a romantic move. Yes. Like he parts the head and exposes the neck, and it almost looks like you could be sucking on the neck or kissing.
There's just two little dots.
Yeah, but this one is like zoomed out. He's like almost sucking on their chest with this guttural like slurping sound, and his whole body is like moving with it. Like it was a very animalistic bite, and that really stood out as kind of unique and was a departure from the more seductive romantic vampire bite. Like this was,
it was more.
You can hear like the blood being slurped in, and his whole body would kind of move with the sucking motion. So that was pretty interesting.
It was really cool too how, and I mean this is from the original, right, where he's consuming her, and you get the sense that maybe he's going to stop, and she pulls his head back to her because she knows the sunrise is coming.
That's right.
Which I also appreciated that he didn't burst into flame. Yeah. He dies, the sunlight kills him, but it's not the typical vampire film where the sunlight will, cause a blister and then he'll burst into flame.
It's not like From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I appreciated that because, and I think there was a sense, and I mean, maybe I'm just reading into this, but I thought there was a sense in Skarsgård's performance that he's beaten at the end and he knows it, but it's almost a release. He gives into it. And I think about films like The Hunger, for example, which is one we should do in our 80s series.
Oh, there we go.
So in that one, it's about the angst and the depression of being immortal. And oh God, I gotta live
that's cool.
100 years, right? So I wondered about that. Like it felt to me like Skarsgård's, like Orlok's character, he's satiated and he's found, if you want to call it that, the love of his life.
His purpose was to reconnect with her.
Yes.
And now that he's done that, he can be done.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I liked too, I mean,
Nicholas Hoult.
If you look at if you've watched the Coppola version, the Mina character, I think what's her name? Oh, it doesn't matter. They play her so that he's met her in the past and then comes to this one is not like that. It's almost like a psychic connection.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And he has finally found her. She's been in the ether. He's sensed that she's there, but now he's seen her, right? And realizes that she's there. Yeah,
I think the thing I'm most curious to go back and check out is their original connection, because it happens right at the beginning of the film.
It does.
And it seems like that should be very important, but it almost felt glossed over maybe, or they didn't.
There wasn't enough detail for me to know that was him.
No, like they leave a lot of interpretation to the audience maybe. Like he doesn't hold your hand at all. So I'd be curious to go back and see that part of it. But you're right. It's a cyclical, like they found each other and then this completes the circle. Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing I was going to say that you were saying some of the, it was unnecessary maybe to have the stuff with the other family.
Yeah.
But I felt like in order to have any kind of body count or to have someone had to die, like he didn't really wreak havoc on anybody.
No.
So him like killing the children was pretty dark too, because there's so many times throughout the movie leading up to that point where the kids are scared.
Yes.
And the mother's always like, it's going to be fine. You're going to be safe. It's all good. And then she goes in and she hears them screaming and he's like eating both of them.
Yes.
And you're like, damn, like that kind of, he always seemed menacing and his demeanor was menacing, but he never really did anything that menacing. And I feel like that moment really sells him as like pure evil. Like he was always imposing, but never that threatening. And so when he's killing off the kids, then you're like, okay, like, yeah, this guy.
There was only one other moment for me when he was quite scary. And that's when
I think
Thomas's character goes and he discovers Orlok's body in his sarcophagus, his coffin, and Orlok comes out, like he awakes, if that's what you want to call it. And I found that was like, whoa, that was pretty intense scene. And that was almost like, this is what I'm capable of, right? It's a hint at what's to come later on.
Yeah.
I mean, Nicholas Hoult is a good actor. And I mean, I think what I'm sensing, the reason I didn't think his performance was as good as Lily Rose Depp is because his character doesn't have the same things to do as she does.
Hers is the most demanding role for sure, and she pulls it off.
Yeah.
Who's the better Dracula, Bill Skarsgård or Nicolas Cage, do you think?
I don't know. Nicolas Cage does some severe damage.
So you're wearing your Versus t-shirt for.
It depends what you want out of your Dracula character. I did appreciate the kind of the different take on Dracula and how like, it's almost like his body, somebody threw acid on it, like it's decaying. And it was a really interesting look. I mean, you mentioned the mustache earlier, but
the way he talked too.
Yes.
The rolling of the
What I read, one of the reviewers said it sounded like Skarsgård was talking through gargling rotten meat, and it was just like, oh, that's a terrible
descriptor.
That's a terrible.
Yeah, I was a bit put off by the look of him, but I really loved the way he talked.
Yeah.
Like I found that really effective and cool.
I thought it was really cool too because, Skarsgård is so good in these roles, like in Pennywise and whatever. But in Pennywise, you really see Skarsgård. You don't see Skarsgård here at all, in the sense of a recognizable.
Oh no,
character,
not at all.
right?
No, it's crazy actually. Yeah,
There's all the prosthetics and
even knowing it's him.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like,
right?
oh yeah, I guess I don't really see it, but
And I think, I told you guys, you and Francois, the story. I was watching a little interview with Skarsgård.
Oh yeah,
Who was he wanted to be in this film from the very beginning, and this was supposed to be released after The Witch. That's how long he's been working on this. Like it's been about 15 years, I think.
I've heard rumors of it for a while, but it wasn't unsure if it was going to happen. It's
exactly.
like, oh, he's thinking about doing it, but maybe he's not going to do it.
So I don't remember what the issue was, like what issues he ran into as a director. But anyway, he ended up making The Lighthouse and then The Northman. And Skarsgård wanted to be the Thomas character, Nicholas Holt's character. And I guess thought that he had made it clear to Eggers that that's what he wanted. So anyway, when it finally comes down and it's solid that they're going to make the film, Skarsgård reaches out and says, he's been so excited to do the film and whatever, and he wants to be Thomas's character. And he's like, oh yeah, I've already, cast Nicholas Hoult for that. And okay, well, I'll be Friedrich. And it's like, oh yeah, I already have Aaron Taylor Johnson for that. And he's like, I just want to be somebody. And it was, I think, if I remember Skarsgård's story, it was Eggers. He said, well, what about Orlok? Do you want to be Orlok? And I wonder sometimes if an actor like Skarsgård worries about being in these kinds of roles, like being typecast, right? But he's so good. And in this one, it's
can't tell it's him anyway. So
no, but it's like Pennywise though. He has the movement,
yes.
And he really understands the character and how it should move, and whatever they did with his voice, because I'm sure that was been doctored at.
I
somehow,
would think so,
right?
Or that's really impressive.
Yeah, exactly. If he's talking like that without any kind of digital.
Because when I see Alexander Skarsgård, I almost see more of a Dracula face on him, and Bill Skarsgård's kind of like baby face. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
But,
so is this your favorite Dracula film then, do you think? Dracula film?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, I would too. I think it's Dracula Dead and Loving It with Leslie Nielsen, but
not Love at First Bite with Nicolas Cage.
Could be. Yeah, I'll have to give that some thought. Renfield.
I saw
Gary Oldman.
Coppola's version in the theaters. I saw Frank Langella's version in the theaters. But
Hammer's version in the theater?
No, I'm not that old.
Okay.
I'm getting close, but I'm not that old. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, because I do like some of the action vampire stuff like Blade or Near Dark or those kinds of films. There's something pretty compelling about taking that character and putting them in a modern time and giving them all these powers. But I also appreciate the period pieces too. So
now, are you burnt out on vampires, would you say? Because you kind of asked, do we need another vampire film? Are you?
Well, I would say, I think vampires are the most popular subgenre in the horror film.
2022, I think, had a lot of vampire films.
Yeah.
Because we watched some of those.
I don't know. And of course, some films will take, more of a metaphorical approach to the vampire as opposed to the vampire.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. Because it's been done so much. We've talked about this before. There are far fewer good werewolf films. The Mummy was kind of popular maybe the 30s to the 60s, and then it kind of declined. And there was we
get the Wolfman this month though, I think.
That's true. And there was the forgettable Frankenstein with Robert De Niro as the monster. That was not very good at all. Anyway, I'm digressing. Anything else you want to say about this one?
I don't think so. I think Yeah, it was an impressive film, really well done. One I'll go back and watch maybe one more time.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, it was really good.
There you go.
Yeah. It's been 50 minutes to talk about it. So I think, yeah. One last question. Where do you rank this in terms of, for Eggers films, what's your favorite one? Or
Witch.
where, like how would, so The Witch is still better than Nosferatu?
Yeah.
Would this be second?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think me as well. Actually, I was really appreciating this film when we were watching it. Like, I think in some ways it's a better film than The Witch.
Yeah.
Like the cinematography and technically what's going on is better. But it is 2 hours and however long.
Well,
2 hours
and I mean,
minutes.
maybe I'm forgiving a little bit because it's so impressive to me that The Witch was his first feature film.
Totally.
So yeah, but I still think maybe it's runtime, maybe it's because Ralph Ineson is such a powerful character, and
in The Witch,
The Witch, and Anya Taylor-Joy is so good in that. And there's that religious element to that film as well, and there's the repression of women and the limited choices that they have.
I think it's better paced.
Yes,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I would still place The Witch above this for me, but this is a clear second.
Yeah. No, I think I'm with you. Yeah.
Well, maybe The Lighthouse would be first.
Yeah, I appreciated The Lighthouse, but it's a bit long.
As a film, I appreciated it, but there were some things that definitely left me scratching my head. Like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe if I watch it the second time, I will go, oh, okay, everything's clear now. But
I wonder what he'll do next. Do you think he stays in the horror genre?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about any properties that he's looking at or developing at this point.
He's going to be walking the line between like historical dramas and horror, so he might go either direction. But hopefully he sticks in the horror genre. Yeah,
he definitely has. I mean, I don't know if there are other things that are compelling to him to want to tell that story.
I think some people tried to put The Northman in the horror category, but I think we both said no.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see there are elements of The Lighthouse that are horrific, but I wouldn't call it a horror film.
Oh, see, I'm pretty okay. Interesting.
Not in the same way as these ones are, as The Witch and Dracula or Nosferatu, but
it almost feels again kind of Lovecraftian to me. The Lighthouse.
So I can see those elements,
like
the cosmic,
and the cosmic,
but I wouldn't put it in the same category as these two. I think are solidly in the horror genre.
Yep.
So there you go.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the aisles.